Welcome to my 1975 Corvette convertible YouTube channel. In this video I will show you how to eliminate the factory troublesome 1968 to 1982 Corvette headlight vacuum system. There are several ways to do this, from doing it yourself or buying one of the many kits that contain all you need. The kit I chose was called the 1968 to 82 headlight electric actuator conversion kit that costs around $760 from Zip Corvette parts, but is available at the other Corvette parts outlets. The advantage with this kit is there are no under-dash modifications or connections needed. This kit utilizes the C3 Corvette headlight motors and the C5 electric headlight module. This kit comes complete with custom mounting brackets and C5 factory-style wiring harness with weather pack connectors. The instructions said it is the simplest conversion or upgrade over the factory C3 vacuum system available, and no cutting or permanent modifications to headlight housings or frame. As you will see, like most modifications to this car, nothing is easy and without some issues, including this kit on a 1975 Corvette with air conditioning. In this video I will show you 3 configurations for controlling the pop-up headlights. This first configuration is the one outlined in the instructions. The directions said to remove the hood and the 2 front turn signal grills, but I was able to install the electric actuators without doing either. Note that if your car has enough vacuum, at least 10 inches of mercury at the headlight vacuum source, your headlights should work if the headlight actuators aren't leaking. I bought a vacuum gauge to measure mine, and it was well over 10 inches of mercury, even with the street cam I have installed. However, both my headlight actuators leak on the upside, so they would not go up. Note, for around $9 each, a new actuator rod seal can repair these, and this is a much cheaper and easier solution than converting to electrical actuators. Since my engine vacuum is relatively low, I didn't want to reduce it more with the headlight vacuum operation load, even though the vacuum check valve should reduce any vacuum loss. Remove all the old headlight vacuum lines shown on this diagram. I put rubber caps on the 3 vacuum tank fittings to prevent dirt from entering. Note, I had an aftermarket spherical vacuum reservoir for the heater and AC control unit instead of using the front vacuum tank. If you want to continue to use the front vacuum tank, then you will need to leave in the 1 vacuum line from the check valve T to the left side of the tank and plug the other 2 ports. The second unused port of the check valve will now need to be plugged. I put in a bypass hose going from the headlight switch to the manual override switch, but that isn't necessary. With all the headlight hoses removed, next I unbolted the 4 5/16 of an inch nuts underneath that hold in the vacuum headlight actuator. Note, this is much easier if you have a lift to get under the car. In my case, I just jacked up the driver's side and added a jack stand for additional precaution. Remove the 2 inner springs on the old headlight actuator assembly. Note, the new electric actuators will not need these springs to be reinstalled. Next, remove the cotter pin on the pin shaft that holds the rod end clevis in the vacuum actuator assembly and slide it out. Pay attention to the 2 curved nylon bushings and washer, as these will need to be reinstalled later. I clean these parts with WD-40 and a paper towel. Try to carefully remove the vacuum headlight actuator from above between the narrow opening between the hood. This will take a few minutes to find the angle that will allow it to be removed without scratching the hood, but I was able to do it. Remove the 2 number 10, 24 coarse bolts for the 2 vacuum operated up-down relays. This is where the relay was mounted and will not be needed anymore. After the vacuum headlight actuators and relays were removed, I started to prepare the new electrical actuators. Install the new actuator rod onto the electric actuator arm by first putting a washer, then the new rod ball end, then the second washer, then the cotter pin. Do the same for the second electrical actuator. You will need to remove the rod end clevis from both old vacuum actuators. I sprayed WD-40 on mine, and even after nearly 50 years, it unscrewed relatively easily. Screw the old clevis onto the new rod, all the way in, then back out 1/2 of a turn. As you can see, my vacuum actuators look brand new because I first replaced my old non-working vacuum actuators with new non-working vacuum actuators. I returned the new bad ones, and that is when I decided to upgrade to electrical actuators. Swap out the clevis to both motors. These may need to be adjusted further when attaching them to the headlight modules. Now the motors are ready to be installed in place of the old vacuum actuators. Here is where the first issue came up. They don't fit. On my 1975 with AC, the AC condenser was too close to the headlight mounting flange. I spent days trying to figure out how to make this fit. I called the supplier and they suggested loosening the AC condenser bracket to get more room. What I eventually did was to pop off the manual control knobs on the motors. These black plastic knobs are just pressed on and will pry off with a flat-bladed screwdriver. This got me another 1/2 of an inch of clearance, but still not enough to fit. Next, I drilled out the 2 inner mounting holes with a 3/8 of an inch drill. I worked on it to widen it as much as possible. Now the motors will just barely fit. Insert the motors accordingly with the LH and RH stamped on the mounting bracket, with the manual control side pointing down, and the 2 inner holes just drilled out. Make sure to route the motor wires along the blank side of the motor, not the actuator lever side. As you can see, I bent some AC condenser fins, but it is still operational. With this change, I can no longer manually open or close the pop-up headlights, but hopefully I won't need to. I get back under the car and put on the 2 speed nuts for the motor and another speed nut for the outer brace. Make sure to reattach both inward and outward braces. I found that you'd have to loosen the other end of the brace to get it over the motor stud and the short 5/16 of an inch bolt. These braces are necessary or your headlight beam will be very jiggly when driving at night. Now with all 3 speed nuts tightened for one side, make sure the headlight is in the down position. Slide the clevis into the actuator lever fork. It should fit at the back side of the fork. If it doesn't fit, then adjust by sliding the clevis out and turning the clevis inward or outward as needed. Make sure you reinstall the clean curved nylon bushings into the slot. Insert the clean pin through both nylon bushings and the clevis. Put the washer on the outer side and then the cotter pin to hold everything together. Next, add the spacer bolt on the front side of the clevis. This is a 5/16, 1 3/4 inch bolt that came with this kit. The kit includes bumper pads to cushion the headlight actuator link when the headlights go up. The rubber pad should be as close as possible to the hinge point. Wipe the area with alcohol and peel off the backing and firmly press it on. Because this pad is 1/8 of an inch thick, you will need to adjust the headlight warning switch, or when you turn on your headlights, the headlight warning light will come on. In my case, one of my switches fell apart when attempting to adjust it, so I just removed it and the other one. However, you can buy a new switch for around $30. This is a good time to lubricate the pivot points on the headlight assemblies, especially in the area where the springs were removed. I used Blaster's white lithium spray-on grease. This completes the mechanical part of the installation. Route the wires from the motors in the same track as where the vacuum hoses used to go. There is a small gap on the left side of the radiator for the wires to get through to the engine bay. In the engine bay, continue to route the wires in the same place the vacuum lines were running. Here is the next problem: mounting the new electric control module. I found the place where the instructions wanted the module mounted was too close to the hood hinge and radiator. Also, this area was not flat enough for a good mount. A much better place was about 18 inches farther, right next to the alternator. Here there is a flat area and it is much closer to the electrical source, the alternator. Also, with the left side of the car jacked up, I could mount the module without taking off the left front wheel like the instructions recommend. The downside of this is the motor wire harness will need to be lengthened by 18 inches. This involves cutting your motor harness weather pack connector off about 3 inches from the end. If you don't want to do this, then you will need to mount the module just below the hood hinge, being careful that the hood latch doesn't interfere with the motor harness. If you choose to lengthen the harness, pull out the motor wiring harness you just fed in from the engine bay. This is to allow easy access to cut off the weather pack connector about 3 inches from the end. I cut off one motor pair at a time to avoid mixing up the wires. I stripped the wires and crimped weatherproof 14 to 16 gauge butt connectors on one side. Then I crimped 18 inches of 16 gauge red and black wires to the other end of these butt connectors. Next, I stripped the motor harness wires that were just cut. Then I crimped more weatherproof 14 to 16 gauge butt connectors to the 18 inches extension. Then crimp the extension wires to the rest of the motor harness. I do this to the second motor. I just a heat gun to shrink the weather-tight butt connectors. This took a lot of heat to get these connectors to shrink down to the wire. I put the loose wires into a cable wrap for protection and zip tie the cable wrap. Configuration 1. Headlights pop up when the parking lights come on and stay up when the headlights come on. This is the base configuration outline in the factory instructions. I had to lengthen the brown control module wire 2 by 18 inches since now the module is further from the left side marker light. I routed the new lengthened motor harness through the small gap between the hood hinge and radiator. Here you see where I mounted the module on this flat area across from the alternator. I used a 1/4 inch drill bit, not the 5/16, the instructions recommended, for the 2 mounting holes for the module. The 5/16 hole was too loose for the push-in fasteners that came with the kit to hold the module to the inner fender. The next step is to connect the brown control wire from the bottom of the module to the left side marker light. I didn't have any 16 gauge brown wire for this extension, so I used a white wire. Use the blue wire splice that came with the kit to splice in the brown control wire, which is white in my case, to the brown marker light. Note the brown marker wire looks almost black due to being very dirty. Next, connect the module power to the alternator. Here is the next problem. The plus 12 volt red and the black return connector rings are too small to fit the 5/16 inch studs on the alternator. As a result, I had to cut off the 1/4 inch rings and crimped on weatherproof 5/16 inch rings. You should disconnect the battery before connecting the module power to the alternator and then reconnect it when done. It is a good idea to have the plus 12 volt stud protected with a rubber boot to prevent accidental shorting. Now the new electric headlight actuators are ready to see if they work. The headlights should be down from the installation. Pull the headlight switch to the first position and the headlights should both come up, with only the marker lights on and the headlights off. This is like the daytime running lights modern cars have, but with the headlights popped up. If you prefer the headlights not to pop up when not on, I will show you an alternative wiring option later. Pull the switch further to turn on the headlights. The headlights should be on and fully popped up. Push the headlight switch all the way in to close the headlights down. Make sure the headlight doors are flush with the body. The new electrical motor adjusts automatically, so if the headlight doors were flush before, they should still be. If not, use the 3 adjustment points shown to get the headlight doors flush to the body. I am amazed at how fast and forcefully these new electric headlight actuators work. That is why it is a good idea to have that rubber bumper installed to quiet down a bit of the headlights going up. Configuration 2, headlights pop up only when the headlights are on. If you prefer to have the headlights up only when they are on, then you will need to make this modification to the kit. I purchased this 4-pack of 1 amp diodes from Amazon that are in a mini ATM fuse body to plug into a custom, low-high beam wiring harness. I also purchased this 6-pack of waterproof, inline mini ATM fuse holders. The wiring harness is made from 2 of these fuse holders, with the diodes installed, to allow the headlights to pop up when either the low or high beam headlights are turned on. Disconnect the headlight control module, brown wire, white in my case due to it being 18 inches longer, from the marker lamp. Unplug the front left marker light. Use a flat bladed screwdriver to disconnect the blue splice from the marker light and control module wire. Put some electrical tape over the marker wire where the splice bit into the insulation. Pull the brown control wire back into the engine bay next to the alternator. In my case, I cut off the 18 inches white wire extension, since the brown control wire will now connect directly to the new diode wiring harness, here in the engine bay. Next, make the new diode wiring harness shown with 2 of these mini fuse holders. Strip only the cathode side leads. The 2 cathode sides will need to be crimped together with a 10 to 12 gauge butt connector. This is what it should look like. However, wait before crimping this until you see the 3rd configuration. The brown control module wire that was connected to the left front marker light now needs to be stripped. Since this brown wire is only 14 gauge, fold it over to fit into the yellow 10 to 12 gauge butt connector that was just connected to the 2 diodes. Crimp this brown wire to finish making the new diode harness. Now the new diode harness is ready for the diodes to be installed. Unfortunately, the mini diodes have a plastic key at the anode side as shown here. For this to fit in the fuse holder, this key will need to be trimmed off. Plug in the diodes as far as it can go. The next issue is that these mini diodes are taller than the mini ATM fuses, so the weatherproof cap will not completely fit. This will need to be sealed later with black gasket RTV and zip tied to make it weatherproof. Make sure the diodes are installed in the fuse holder in the same direction. In my case, I have the cathode side, the end with the vertical line, on the opposite side of the fuse holder's cap attachment. The next issue is to find the low and high beam headlight wires that will be used to control the pop-up headlights. I found it difficult to splice into these wires at the headlights, so I chose to splice into them in the engine bay. The headlight harness goes down the left side. Carefully slice the sheathing around the headlight wire bundle across from the alternator to get access to the low and high beam headlights. In this bundle are two light green, 16 gauge, high beam wires. These are the thicker gauge wires and the only light green wires in this bundle. Use the blue 14 to 16 gauge splice connector to crimp either one of these two light green high beam wires to one of the anodes in the new diode wiring harness. In this same bundle is the low beam tan wire. There is more than one tan wire, but the low beam is the only 16 gauge tan wire and is thicker than the other tan wires. Use another blue 14 to 16 gauge splice connector to crimp to the second anode of the new diode wiring harness to the 16 gauge tan low beam headlight wire. Offset the second splice from the first one by an inch or so. This will allow them to fit better in the cable wrap that will be installed later. Now when you pull the light switch to the first position, the marker lights, also known as the parking lights, go on without the headlights popping up. Pull the light switch to the second position will turn on the headlights, and they will pop up. This way the headlights are up only when the headlights are on. I prefer this option, especially when driving in the rain with my marker lights on during daytime. Configuration 3. Adding an override switch. But what if you want to have the headlight override switch to work? This is useful when washing your car and you want to clean the headlights, but not have to have the headlights on while cleaning them. Since there is already a custom harness for the low and high beams, you can add another diode for the override switch as shown in this diagram. 4 diodes come in the pack and 6 fuse holders in the other pack, so why not use them? The override switch needs to have a constant plus 12 volts to allow the headlights to go up without the headlight switch on or the keys in the ignition. Also, it would be convenient for the new override switch to be mounted near the headlights and in an inconspicuous location. You can pick a different place if you want, but the location I chose was on the left side front grille. There is an ideal mounting spot right on the vertical flat area between the top 2 louvers. I bought this switch at the local auto parts store. Detach the left front grille by removing these 5 screws. Unplug the front marker light. Make a paper template for the exact location of the new override switch. As shown here, the center of the half-inch hole is 1 1/4 of an inch from this vertical louver and 11/32 from the top and 9/32 from the bottom. Drill a small pilot hole first at the location shown, and once there is a mark on the grill, remove the template. Being careful not to hit the top or bottom louvers, use a 1/2 of an inch drill bit to drill all the way through. Since the grill is slanted forward, the override switch will need to have plastic spacers to orient the switch evenly between the louvers. I got 3 black nylon washers from Ace Hardware for 50 cents each. It is a 1/2 inch black nylon washer. The size of the nylon washer is illustrated here. Cut these 1/2 inch washers in 5 concentric arcs and super glue them together as shown. Note, this spacer would be an ideal project for a 3D printer as well as many other custom parts. Remove both the hex nut and round nut from the switch body. Insert the switch from the back of the grill with the switch contacts away from the grill edge. This is to provide clearance from accidental shorting of the 12 volts to the car's mounting frame. From the front, slip the new super glued spacer over the switch as shown. Use only the round nut to secure the switch to the grill. Don't over tighten, but a snug fit. Now the switch should be in line with the slope of the grill to allow it to get past the car's grill mount. Now the switch level is nearly centered between the louvers. Note, using a smaller switch would make this much simpler and could be mounted directly on the grill without the need for the custom spacer. Reinstall the front grill, but being aware of the switch hitting the grill mounting bracket. This might take some adjusting to get the switch past the car's frame. Use a suitable rubber boot to go over the switch's toggle lever. I used one of these vacuum plugs from the auto parts store that fits perfectly over the lever. I sealed it with black gasket RTV to make it weatherproof. The custom harness for adding the low and high beams will need a 3rd diode for the override switch. There needs to be a constant plus 12 volts going to the switch, and the switch output goes to the anode of the 3rd diode. For the override switch's constant plus 12 volts, I used one of the headlight actuator motor 12 gauge power wires after the fuse from the alternator that is part of this kit. First, remove the power actuator fuse from the holder to prevent accidental shorting. Use the yellow 10 to 12 gauge crimped on splice connector to connect the override switch's power. I used a 16 gauge red wire to go from the alternator to the front left grille. This wire is 5 feet, 6 inches long. The override switch power wire would be better if it was 12 or 14 gauge to make it fit better in the 10 to 12 gauge splice. To get this 16 gauge wire to work in a 10 to 12 gauge splice, I needed to fold it vertically in the splice connector to make sure the contact fork pierced the wire insulator. Crimp on this yellow splice over the 12 gauge red power wire with vice grips or pliers until the slice fork is pushed flush with the top of the yellow plastic. Snap the cap over for a solid fit. Strip and crimp on a weatherproof 14 to 16 gauge female connector to other side of this red power wire. This is a power connection to the override switch. The other connection to the override switch goes from the front left grille to the engine bay. This is a 16 gauge, 4 foot, 6 inches, white wire. Strip and crimp this end with a 14 to 16 gauge weatherproof female connector. The other end of this white wire goes from the override switch to the third anode on the new diode wiring harness. Strip the 16 gauge third diode anode red wire. Crimp one side of a 14 to 16 gauge weatherproof butt connector to this anode red wire. Now strip the white override switch wire. Crimp this white override switch wire to the third anode butt connector. Use a heat gun or hair dryer to shrink the weatherproof connectors. This will take a lot of heat to get them to seal to the insulation. At the override switch, press on the red power wire to the middle switch terminal, called load, on this switch. Press on the white wire that goes to the third anode to the terminal on the left. This connection can be either side, depending on which switch position you want to have the headlights to go up. This diagram shows the complete electrical connections for the additional features of having the headlights only go up when the headlights are on and with an override switch. To protect the headlight wiring harness that we spliced into, use a 3/4 inch cable wrap to cover the new splices and wires. I used this one for this purpose. Tuck the new wraps in the cable clips under the engine bay left side. Make sure the 3 diodes are also tucked under and out of the way. Let's check out the new electrical headlight conversion for the new features. Pull the headlight switch out to the first position. Marker lights go on without the headlights popping up. That is good. Pull the headlight switch out to the second position. Headlights now go on and the headlights pop up. The low beam headlights are on. Check to see if the high beams work as well. The headlights should stay up in either mode. Push the headlight switch all the way in to turn them off and close the headlight doors. Now with the keys out of the ignition and the headlight switch off, let's try the new override switch. Push the override switch to the right to pop up the headlights. Push the override switch to the left to close the headlights. Great, everything works. Thanks for watching to the very end, and I will have more videos working on my 1975 Corvette. Don't hesitate to reach out in the comments if you have any questions or need further assistance. Goodbye for now. From Southern Arizona during this holiday season.